The protagonist reflects on his motivations. He just wanted to be someone that could help others, just like his great father fought to protect this world. Surrounded by the dark silhouettes of monstrous demons, he sits there in meditation, and his thoughts are crystal clear. He's not trying to be a hero. Meanwhile, a few hours earlier, the scene shifts to a town with this tall church tower rising above all the buildings. The protagonist recalls wanting to be the kind of person who could protect others, while people walk through the streets below. Then, in his attic bedroom, the kid lies there completely exhausted in bed. A small creature tries to wake him up, telling him he's got to get up, but the boy just mutters that he's tired. The text reveals his identity: Julia Curtis, 13 years old and a sophomore at Exorcist Academy in 3rd Barrier City. Julia looks out his window at the landscape beyond, and here's the thing. 150 years ago, humanity was defeated by the demon race and driven to this region where they built Barrier City. The fortified city sits on elevated ground surrounded by mountains, and the outside of the city is veiled in this never-ending twilight, controlled by dangerous, grotesque-looking demons whose silhouettes loom menacingly. But while living in the city, humans are trying to fight against the demons outside by building up and training in Exorcist Academy. Julia stands there in his full Exorcist uniform with a white cape. They hope to regain the light in the skies cloaked by the twilight. That was also one of his goals as a student of the Academy. He looks down at a framed photograph on his desk showing 2 people. Julia tells his mom and dad that he's heading out as he looks at their photograph. His father was an exorcist but died fighting demons when Julia was young, and his mother died from an epidemic around the same time. But he didn't feel lonely though, because his dream was to become a great exorcist just like his father. Suddenly, someone calls out to Julia. A spiky-haired kid greets him, saying he's looking forward to working with him today. The kid's standing there with 2 other students in exorcist uniforms, a girl wearing a witch hat and a light-haired guy. Julia acknowledges them and heads over. Then someone tells him to stop being scared, while others in the group are expressing their nervousness about going out to hunt demons, questioning whether they'll really be okay since they're not even used to being out there yet. The thing is, at the Exorcist Academy, classes in actual combat have begun, which means hunting demons outside Barrier City. It's dangerous for sure, but without the training, they'll never become full-fledged exorcists. The light-haired guy named Nola explains that just like last time, Leona and he will be the vanguard, and Nola will be the rearguard. Meanwhile, the spiky-haired kid named Dan adds that if Julia supports them with his healing and distracts the demons with his illusion magic, they'll be fine. Leona, the girl with the witch hat, mentions that if they can hunt demons in the danger zone they're about to enter, they'll get a big boost in reputation from the Academy. The goal is clear. They'll keep hunting until they become S-ranked exorcists. Now, S-ranked exorcists are ranked higher than all other exorcists from A to E. They're even said to be humanity's hope in fighting against the twilight, and it's what all students at the Academy aspire to be. But then someone tells Julia he doesn't really have to do anything since they'll be the ones reporting back to the Academy after returning. Julia starts to object, but someone calls out to him. Dan confronts him, telling him to think about his position before saying anything and asking if he minds, since their skills don't even compare. Thing is, an E-rank like Julia has never met an S-ranked exorcist before. Julia agrees quietly and just accepts the situation. Then Nola asks Dan if they're already in the danger zone. Dan responds uncertainly. Someone tells the group to look ahead, and they spot claw lizards in the forest. Someone comments that they're not too bad and suggests they hunt them down. The team engages the claw lizards in combat. Liam is casting magic while Dan and Nola go in with their weapons. The coordinated assault takes down the demons pretty efficiently. Dan yells that they can do this, but as one demon falls, way more claw lizards start emerging from the forest. Meanwhile, Julia notices the situation deteriorating and calls out to Dan, asking if there aren't quite a lot of them. He realizes the danger they're in. Suddenly, the claw lizards completely surround the team. The demons are everywhere, attacking from all sides. The students get scattered and overwhelmed by the sheer number of monsters closing in on them. Nola calls out to Julia, telling him to lead the demons away and that they'll strike from behind once he does. Dan starts to protest, but then yells that they need to just do it or they're all dead, so Dan reluctantly agrees to the plan. Julia activates his physical enhancement magic to maximize his body's capabilities. Then he dashes forward at incredible speed, launching himself toward the horde of claw lizards. Julia leaps through the air, engaging the demons directly, casting his illusion magic while attacking at the same time. The claw lizards react to the magical effects as Julia fights them head-on. Meanwhile, from a distance, Dan, Nola, and Leona watch Julia draw the demons away, but then the narration reveals what really happened. In the end, Dan and the others ran off without a fight and never came back. The teammates had decided to leave Julia behind and escape. Julia reflects that honestly, he'd had a feeling this would happen someday. He'd been betrayed and used as bait. Now Julia stands alone in the forest, feeling like he can't take it anymore. He thinks he should go back, but when the betrayal actually happened, the shock hit him hard. An inexplicable emptiness and sadness fills his chest. Then he notices something and realizes what they did. They trapped him inside with the horde of claw lizards using Leona's magic barrier. He recognizes that they put a lot of thought into setting up this trap. Julia stands at the edge of the magical barrier, his cape flowing behind him, and the reality of his situation sinks in. He realizes that now he can't even go back. The barrier traps him on this side with the demons. Julia wonders how many days have passed since then. It no longer seems possible to return to the city. The only thing on his mind was that he didn't want to die. He knows the outside world is dangerous. The twilight is harmful to the body. He thinks about what's going to happen if he stays out here for longer. His body weakens as time passes, and eventually Julia collapses, stumbling and falling to the ground. Something attacks Julia with tremendous force. His body gets thrown violently through the air, ragdolling from the impact before he crashes hard into the rocky ground. The collision is brutal and unforgiving. Julia lies face down on the ground, barely conscious. His mind drifts to how it came to this. Dan, Nola, and Leona's faces flash through his thoughts, staring back at him. A dark emotion starts rising inside him, though even that's getting fuzzy now. Then the desperate thought echoes in his fading consciousness. He wants to survive. He doesn't want to die. But Julia's awareness flickers. Suddenly, something catches his attention. He slowly pushes himself up from the ground. Still weak but driven by the need to survive, he clenches his fist, finding some reserve of strength, and his expression shifts from despair to determination as his eye focuses with renewed intensity. Then Julia notices something happening to his arm. A strange dark pattern begins spreading across his skin, organic and unsettling. He stares at it in shock, unable to comprehend what he's seeing as the transformation crawls up his arm like living shadows. Julia stares at his corrupted arm in shock, wondering if the magic from the twilight is corroding him. He's never seen anything like this. The twilight harms the body, sure, but how is this happening? He sits there on the barren ground, a weak laugh escaping him as reality sets in. He's probably the only human being who's been in the twilight for this long. Even high-ranked exorcists don't stay out here for long periods of time. At this point, who knows what's going to happen? Julia's expression hardens as he considers his situation. If this kills him, it's over. Meanwhile, in the dark forest around him, marked by crosses of the dead, anything could happen now. A massive demon looms before Julia, a claw lizard boss with this grotesque muscular body, a gaping maw full of fangs, and massive wings spreading out above him. Julia thinks about being eaten, but then realizes he's actually feeling kind of hungry himself. He wonders how long it's been since he last ate. Meanwhile, he recognizes the creature as a claw lizard boss and accepts the grim reality that he's about to be eaten by this thing. The word death just hangs heavy in the moment. The dark corruption spreads further across Julia's body as despair threatens to consume him completely. He's going to die without achieving anything, without being able to do anything at all. His face starts transforming, eyes becoming these strange spiral patterns as the corruption takes hold. He wanted to be someone who could help others, but his legs are trembling beneath him as the realization hits harder, not a pawn to be used by others. The demon roars as Julia refuses to give in. He needs to defeat this demon, but he needs a weapon. Then the thought strikes him, maybe he could make one with his illusions, but he catches himself, almost laughing at the absurdity, because after all, it's just an illusion. Then he pauses and waits, something clicking in his transformed mind. The demon bellows at him to die here. Suddenly, Julia's hand grips a blade that shouldn't exist. At that moment, his body is already on the move. He charges forward, the transformation spreading across his arm as he runs, and the blade feels solid in his grasp. Illusion magic can only be used for distractions, but for some reason Julia feels like he could do a bit more with it. The weapon materializes more fully, smoke and energy swirling around it as he moves to strike. Julia launches his attack against the claw lizard boss. The blade connects and the demon explodes into fragments, its massive form shattering under the impossible strike. Julia stands there victorious, his corrupted arm still gripping the weapon he created, his face showing this mix of determination and something darker. The transformation complete. This was the beginning. The scene opens with Julia standing victorious, his corrupted transformation complete. After defeating the claw lizard boss, the remains of the demon lay scattered across the wasteland. Then a mysterious figure with light hair and a white cloak appears, extending a hand toward Julia. Julia's stomach rumbles and he realizes he's starving. The figure tells him they should eat. 1 year passes. Julia sits in the rocky wasteland, eating demon meat cooked over a fire. He traveled and traveled, but Third Barrier City was nowhere to be found. He'd been surviving by killing and eating demons, but despite all this time, he's still stuck in the twilight. Meanwhile, Julia begins to understand more about how the twilight works. The demons living in the twilight have auras around them that represent their strength. The illusory sword he first activated that day against the claw lizard boss has a unique property. For some reason, this sword absorbs the demon's auras and turns them into his own power. Julia defeats another demon with his sword technique. The connection is most likely because the sword is linked to the corrupted mark on his right arm, though he's not entirely sure. In the mysterious twilight world, only the strongest survive. In any case, he has to use everything he's got to stay alive. Julia walks through the desolate landscape with one simple desire on his mind. He just wants to go back. Doesn't have to be his hometown, Third Barrier City. Could be the First Barrier City or literally any city wherever. He can't find anything though, and maybe he's just being dumb about it. As he continues down a rocky path through the twilight, something up ahead suddenly catches his attention. Julia spots something in the distance through the twilight wasteland. Houses. Thatched roof huts standing in a clearing surrounded by trees. He just stares at the village in complete disbelief. Then Julia reflects on everything that's happened to him. He was trapped in the twilight for a whole year, and just when he thought he wanted to go back home, he was betrayed and left to die. Now here he is, standing before a human village in the twilight. Julia approaches one of the huts and looks up at the entrance. The size is absolutely massive. He realizes this is completely different from the troll-human species nests like goblins he's encountered along the way. These structures are actually pretty and well constructed. Suddenly, a tall figure in white robes with an ornate belt appears, asking if Julia is a guest. Julia's eyes widen as he takes in the figure's enormous size. Cloud giants. He remembers learning about them back at the academy. They're just as intelligent as humans and boast incredible strength, though they're not a belligerent species. They are, however, rarely aggressive towards humans. The elderly bearded cloud giant and other villagers nearby react with shock at seeing a human in the twilight. Then one of them notices something significant about Julia's right arm. The tall figure mentions he set up a barrier against outsiders, guessing it isn't operating properly, and asks who Julia is. Julia introduces himself, explaining his name is Julia and he's human. The cloud giants struggle to process this, wondering how a human could possibly be here and questioning what he even is. Julia considers whether these cloud giants might know something about his corrupted arm, especially since they seem familiar with the term twilight human, something he's never even heard before. The cloud giants discuss Julia, referring to him as a twilight human, a term Julia's never heard before, making him wonder if they know something about his corrupted arm. One of the cloud giants acknowledges the classification and Julia studies the large bearded cloud giant before him, noting he looks much stronger than the others and wondering about his tusks. The bearded giant confirms Julia's name and introduces himself as Edgar, the chief of the village. Edgar tells Julia to come with him and welcomes him to the village, and Julia follows Edgar through the settlement while weighing his options. He can't really turn down the invitation, and he doesn't detect any hostility from the chief. But still, cloud giants are demon kin, which makes him wonder why they seem so accustomed to humans. For now, he decides to follow Edgar and see where this leads. As they walk past the thatched huts, Edgar says he understands Julia's situation for now. Inside Edgar's hut, Julia sits while Edgar stands in his white robes. Julia mentions he's been wandering around for a year ever since he left his city, which is definitely not trivial for humans, and asks if Edgar knows about the Barrier City's existence. Edgar confirms they know about it, explaining their relations with humans are quite neutral. Then Edgar reveals something interesting. If he recalls correctly, someone appeared here about 3 years ago, and that person had red markings on his arm just like Julia's. Edgar explains that the markings are proof that Julia is a twilight human, proof that a human has adapted to the twilight. Julia looks distressed and asks if Edgar knows anything about these markings. Julia confirms that the twilight is poisonous for humans, and Edgar explains they're called twilight people, that there are some who can adapt to it. Those who live in the twilight have an ability called twilight field, and twilight people are the only ones who can resist it, or so they say. Julia processes this new information and realizes that must be the secret behind his invisible sword. Edgar admits the Twilight's cause and origin are all a mystery. Then he asks Julia if he wants to return to the barrier cities. Julia emphatically confirms he does, but explains he has no idea where he is and all he's been doing is wandering around aimlessly. Meanwhile, Julia mentions he has a map, and Edgar offers to give it to him if he'd like. Julia reacts with surprise, asking if he's serious. Edgar confirms it, and Julia can't believe what he's hearing. But then Edgar asks if Julia would have a bout with him. He explains that cloud giants are a species that lives by the sword, and he had a bout with that man who came here 3 years ago but ended up losing. Edgar proposes a one-on-one match where they use their martial arts to the best of their ability and fight it out. If Julia accepts, Edgar will give him the map and the books he previously mentioned, as well as supplies and whatever else is necessary for his travels. Julia reacts with surprise at the sudden proposal. He thinks to himself that he hasn't felt any hostility since meeting Edgar, so he can trust him. Julia accepts the challenge. Julia thinks about wanting to try out his new power anyway, so he happily accepts Edgar's offer. The two face each other in an open area with Julia standing ready with his sword while Edgar sits casually on the ground. Edgar pulls out his massive blade and reminds Julia that this isn't a death match. Julia confirms he understands and says he'll do the same, drawing his invisible sword. Both fighters take their stances. Julia observes the situation for a moment, then announces he'll be starting the match. He charges forward toward Edgar. Edgar thinks Julia's attack is just a straight line with his sword, nothing extraordinary about it. But then he realizes it's still hard to avoid. Julia moves in with incredible speed and Edgar reacts in surprise. The young fighter attacks from multiple angles in rapid succession, forcing Edgar on the defensive. Julia can't believe cloud giants can use inertia control magic as well. Edgar's blade changed its trajectory at an impossible angle, and it must be that magic at work. Meanwhile, Edgar observes that Julia is materializing his illusion magic into a sword, and to an amazing degree of completion at that, as one would expect from a Twilight human. Edgar realizes he has no choice but to go all out. Edgar launches a powerful counterattack, leaping high into the air and coming down at Julia with tremendous force. The impact sends shockwaves through the area as their blades clash with explosive energy. Julia thinks he'll be at a disadvantage if they drag this out, so to finish quickly, he'll have to push harder. Edgar charges in yelling that Julia is his. Julia's small creature companion watches the intense fight unfold. Julia curses as he's forced into a difficult position by Edgar's overwhelming assault. Then Edgar launches a devastating counterattack that completely overwhelms Julia. The older cloud giant's blade comes down with crushing force and Julia gets knocked back hard. Edgar's face shows he's not holding back anymore. Julia thinks about how he successfully lured his opponent into being careless, but when the dust settles, Julia admits that it's his loss. Meanwhile, Edgar looks at his sword and wonders about something. Julia acknowledges he went all out halfway through the bout, but Edgar didn't use half of his strength at all. Edgar tells Julia that either way, he's the one who ended up winning the bout. He says he'll give Julia what he promised so that Julia can depart. But then Julia asks if he can stay here for a little longer. Edgar thinks it might be good for Julia to train before he leaves. Julia explains that for a whole year he's been sleeping outside, and he kept wondering if he fell asleep, would he ever wake up again? Julia says a survival of the fittest mentality was ingrained into him, so in order for him to get back home safely, he wants to get as strong as possible before he leaves. Edgar breaks into laughter and congratulates Julia. Edgar tells him that if that's what he wants, he'll help him out as much as possible. Julia thanks him very much. Later, Julia stands with the cloud giants at the village for what's clearly a farewell scene. Julia thanks Edgar for everything, and Edgar tells him to take care on the way. Julia thanks them again, thinking about how he's indebted to them after staying at Cloud Giant Village for 6 months. He looks down at the book Edgar gave him and reflects that thanks to them, he's become way stronger. Julia knows the book is written about the Twilight world and demons. Maybe he can get someone to look at it when he gets back to the city. Then the thought of actually going back to the city crosses his mind. He doesn't know where he would even belong if he went back now. But honestly, it beats wandering around here forever. Julia decides to go home. Meanwhile, after 6 months of traveling since leaving the Cloud Giant Village, Julia is seriously struggling. He admits he's not there yet. He's been searching for almost a year now, but thinks it should be about time he arrives. The real problem, though, is food. He hasn't come across any edible monsters in the last few days. He spots another jellyfish-type creature and a crow lizard, but they're both labeled as delicious by his standards now. Julia is starving, but he tells himself it's fine since he can't help the situation anyway. Then Julia finally spots something in the distance, a city wall. He recognizes it as Barrier 4th City. The massive fortress comes into view, and Julia's emotions just overflow. He collapses to his knees in relief, barely able to process it. He made it. Julia cries out that he's back home, that he's finally home. Julia stumbles forward and collapses to the ground, completely spent. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears, a long-haired girl in elegant formal attire with a white cloak. She stands there calmly, looking down at where Julia has fallen. Julia wakes up in an unfamiliar room, lying in a proper bed. He's inside somewhere safe. Two people are at his bedside, and the one wearing glasses asks if he's awake. The woman with glasses introduces herself as Elsa Amos and asks for Julia's name. Julia introduces himself as Uriah Curtis and asks if this is Barrier City. He confirms it is, but then realizes it's the 7th one, not the 3rd. Julia looks at a map showing the Barrier Cities and notes he must have drifted a bit from his intended destination. He figures it's fine though. But then the reality properly sinks in. This is the 7th Barrier City. Elsa explains that Julia's clothes were badly soiled, so they're being laundered right now. An exorcist training student found Julia unconscious outside, and the clothing he was wearing was the uniform of 3rd Barrier City. Elsa tells Julia that she's seen his face on the missing persons list, but something doesn't add up. Even Julia's hair color changed. She asks what on earth Julia was doing for 2 years, since he's been missing for the past 2 years. Julia starts to respond but stops himself. He thinks about the monsters and demons he encountered, realizing these people are wary of him. He's not sure if they'll trust his story, but Julia decides he should be honest with them. Before getting into that though, he asks if they could please get him something to eat. He's so hungry he's reaching his limit. Meanwhile, Elsa calls out to someone named Sherry to bring Julia some clothes. The long-haired girl responds affirmatively. Julia sits there eating the food they brought him, clearly enjoying it after going so long without a proper meal. Elsa mentions that now that he's eaten, she wants to hear about him wandering around in the twilight for 2 years, and Julia confirms that it's true. Elsa admits it's hard to believe, but the evidence isn't completely absurd. She notes the bruises covering Julia's body, which lends some credibility to his story. Then she asks Julia what he plans to do now. Does he want to return to the 3rd Barrier City? What about the academy? Julia grips the bedsheets tightly, his face tense as he considers the question. He clenches his fist and admits his dream is to become an exorcist master, but there's a problem. There's no place for him back home anymore. Elsa considers this for a moment and makes a suggestion. Why doesn't Julia transfer here and become an exorcist master of the 7th Barrier City instead? Julia's eyes widen in surprise at the offer. He asks if she's serious and says he'd love to do that. Elsa tells him she'd be happy to help with the transfer and admits she's late in introducing herself properly. Turns out she's the headmaster of the academy. Before things can proceed, a girl in an elaborate uniform storms in and objects loudly. She catches herself calling Elsa Mom before correcting to Headmaster, clearly trying to keep things professional. She doesn't believe that a frail, skinny-looking girl like Julia could have survived in the twilight for 2 whole years, and she's convinced he's lying. Besides, with that shaggy hair, he's definitely a weirdo, and she absolutely doesn't trust him. Julia looks completely drained by this hostile reception. Then Elsa introduces the girl as Sherry Amos, her daughter, and the one who actually found Julia collapsed outside the city. She tells Sherry that Julia is in trouble and asks if there would be any problem accepting him at the academy since he was originally an Exorcist Academy student. After a moment, Elsa suggests they handle this a certain way. Sherry proposes a challenge. They'll fight one-on-one in a mock battle. If Julia wins, he can transfer to the academy here, but if he loses, he goes straight back to his city. Julia's face goes pale with shock at the sudden challenge. Meanwhile, Elsa sighs at her daughter's behavior but allows it, as long as it's just a mock battle. Then she asks what Julia thinks about it. Sherry presses him for an answer while Elsa observes her daughter's forceful tactics. Julia lies there thinking about the duel challenge, and suddenly the same thing that happened to him a year ago flashes through his mind. He tells himself it can't be happening again. Sherry makes an unimpressed sound at his reaction. Julia reflects on the situation, remembering his past and honestly admitting he doesn't want to go back to 3rd Barrier City. Then after a moment of consideration, Sherry tells him she'll do it. Sherry thanks him while looking determined. Julia thinks to himself that it would probably be better if he just went to a new place anyway. The 3 of them head toward the academy building for the mock battle. Elsa lays out the rules for the one-on-one match. They're free to use magic, but if she deems anything dangerous, they have to stop immediately. Since it's only a mock battle, to win they need to strike a decisive blow. She asks if Julia understands, and he confirms that he does. Then Sherry drops a bombshell on Julia. She didn't mention this before, but she's an A-rank exorcist. Julia's face lights up in genuine amazement at hearing this. Suddenly someone calls out Julia's name as a sword flashes through the air. Julia asks if Sherry even knows what A-rank means, and Sherry tells him they're the same age. Elsa signals for the battle to start, and Sherry immediately launches an aggressive attack, declaring that A-rank means Julia will never win. She strikes him down hard. Close-ups show both fighters' eyes locked in concentration as they size each other up during the brief exchange. Sherry thinks to herself that she doesn't even need to use her invisible blade technique to prove she's stronger than him. Meanwhile, on the other side, Julia realizes he could read her movements, so he quickly tries to close the gap between them. Elsa watches in confusion as Julia demands a rematch, and Sherry's face fills with shock at the request. Julia insists on going one more time. Then the mock battles repeat over and over. Julia keeps getting knocked down and demanding to go again, the cycle continuing multiple times with the same result. But the battles finally end after 10 consecutive losses for Julia. He stands there with his sword while Sherry sits on the ground, completely exhausted and defeated. Sherry admits he's really strong. She says she said something stupid earlier and apologizes. Julia tells her it's his loss and gives up. Elsa declares it's settled then, but Julia starts to protest, only for Sherry to cut him off, saying she's not really that strong. Then Elsa welcomes Julia to the 7th Barrier City Exorcist Academy and officially registers him as an A-rank exorcist. The announcement causes an uproar. Someone questions if it's really A-rank, pointing out he beat Shelley, who's ranked A. Another voice protests that it's too absurd, but someone else reasons that a rank would be a reasonable starting point given the circumstances. Meanwhile, Elsa asks if there's anything he needs or wants in the meantime, mentioning she'll send him the transfer form later. Julia starts to respond by asking for something. Suddenly, someone reacts with surprise to his request for a haircut. Julia stands in front of the academy building in his new uniform with a fresh haircut. The scene highlights his complete transformation with the new look, new uniform, and new school. His new life is beginning. Then Julia introduces himself to the class, telling everyone his name is Julia Curtis, and he's transferred from 3rd Barrier City. He says it's nice to meet them all. The other students look at him with various expressions. A dark-haired girl named Sherry and a serious-looking male student all take in the new transfer student. But the questions start flying immediately. Someone calls out that they have a question, and a dark-haired girl asks if it's true that Julia spent 2 years in the Twilight area. Julia laughs it off nervously, saying it's not true and he just moved here due to some circumstances. Then another student asks about the rumor that he beat Shelley in a sword duel. Julia explains that he and Shelley Sand didn't have a fight. They just ran into each other while he was filling out his registration form. But Sherry confirms that's not true either. Then the male student says he has a question too and asks what exorcist rank Julia is. The dark-haired girl comments that in the end, rumors are just rumors. Suddenly Sherry's eyes narrow, and the dark-haired girl looks surprised. Julia hesitates before answering that his current rank is A-rank. The reaction is immediate. Someone asks if it's for real, saying they expected as much given the rumor he beat Shelley. The male student and dark-haired girl both react with shock at hearing A-rank. Julia tries to downplay it nervously, insisting it just happened that way and it's not that big a deal. He struggles to explain the reason while looking flustered. Meanwhile, Sherry just stares at him with an annoyed expression. The girl with glasses walks alongside Julia in the academy hallway, laughing as she tells him they must have bombarded him with questions since day one. She adds that it's not every day they get a new student, so to some extent he's better off just dodging these rumors. Julia agrees with her. Later, Julia stands there in his white academy uniform as the girl continues speaking. She tells him that as she's sure he's already aware, he should keep the pattern in his right arm a secret for now. It'll just create unnecessary confusion. Julia confirms he understands. Then the girl with glasses informs Julia they need to run some tests on him, explaining that in his case, because of his right arm, they need to do more than usual. Normally, new students only have a standard physical exam. Julia asks about the physical examination. Julia tells her he'd like to know what's going on with his body too, and she agrees that's natural. But then the girl's expression becomes serious as she tells him to get this straight. They believe they've found a new disease in him, a disease they call something specific. The revelation hits hard. The disease is called Twilight Syndrome. A dramatic shot shows Julia's face with his unusual eye visible, and the girl explains it's already at the 5th stage, no, even further than that. She goes on to explain that Twilight Syndrome was announced at an academic scientific study conference about a year and a half ago. Twilight is harmful to humans, proven using data on how far it develops. When normal people reach the 5th stage of Twilight Syndrome, they lose consciousness and slowly die. She figures it doesn't apply to Julia though, given that he spent the previous 2 years in this condition. Then she continues, saying that here they call it something different. This is the first time Julia's heard the term Twilight Human. She mentions they've been working on that as well. Furthermore, in the story Julia told her the other day about the Cloud Giants, he mentioned the Twilight area. Julia's eye widens as he processes this. She confirms his realization. The severity of his condition is equal to an S-rank exorcist. The girl explains that S-rank exorcists can survive in the Twilight area. Julia responds that he doesn't know what the people in Cloud Giants village told her, but either way, in essence, they can assume he's just as capable as an S-ranked exorcist. She tells him he's a very valuable being. The weight of this information settles as Julia walks through the empty hallways. Meanwhile, Julia struggles to process everything, wondering what kind of person he's becoming. The girl mentions that besides, they're doing research on the symptoms, which is much better than being a complete mystery. Then the girl shows Julia to his accommodations, telling him the student dorms are all full, so as for where he'll be sleeping. There's a vacant dormitory cabin for the lecturers, and he'll have to crash there for a while. Julia looks at the room and thinks it's like heaven compared to out there. As they part ways in the hallway, the girl tells Julia she's counting on him and asks him to please take care of Shelley for her too. Julia agrees, telling her he'll see her later. Now Julia and Sherry stand in the academy hallway facing each other, the tension between them thick as they stare at each other silently. Sherry has her arms crossed, looking at Julia with an intense expression while Julia looks nervous with sweat running down his face. The awkward standoff continues for a moment longer. In the next scene, they're still just standing there in complete silence, Sherry maintaining her stern posture while Julia shifts around uncomfortably. A chibi shot shows just how awkward the kid feels as he waits to see what she's gonna do next. Finally, Sherry breaks the silence and tells him to come with her for a second. The scene cuts to show the academy tower in the background as she leads him somewhere. Then Sherry hands Julia these elaborate sandwiches, telling him here he goes. Julia just stares at them in total surprise, clearly not expecting this at all. They end up sitting together on a bench in one of the academy's garden areas. Sherry explains that the food's for him since he probably didn't pack his lunch anyway, and he doesn't have anyone to share it with. Julia's eyes start watering up as he thanks her emotionally, obviously touched by the gesture after everything that just happened. As Julia eats, Sherry asks if it's cool to ask him something about Twilight. Julia agrees easily enough while taking another bite of the sandwich. Then Sherry asks how he survived and what he ate there. Julia answers that for food, he usually ate monsters, explains that at first it was tough, but he got used to it eventually. There were frogs, snakes, and spiders which were surprisingly delicious once he adapted. Julia holds up the sandwich and tells her that still, the finest delicacy is simple food like this. Sherry comments that if he's so strong, the only thing he has to worry about is food. But Julia corrects her, saying it's only after he went to Twilight that he became strong. Sherry asks how he ended up in Twilight in the first place. Julia explains that before that, he was an E-rank exorcist and a failure, the lowest ranked in his class. Sherry reacts with disbelief, finding it hard to believe he's telling the truth. A moment of silence passes as Julia looks contemplative. Then Sherry mentions that at the academy, their curriculum requires students to form parties to hunt in safe zones. Julia confirms he knows about that, then reveals something darker. One time their leader decided to go to the danger zone instead. Leaves fall around them as the conversation continues. Julia keeps going with his story, explaining how they encountered a ton of monsters, so his teammates ended up using him as bait. Sherry reacts in shock, completely unable to believe what she's hearing. But Julia explains further. They actually trapped him inside a magic barrier to lure the monsters straight to him. He thinks the barrier disappeared after a night or maybe a few days, but back then he couldn't bear staying in a place like that for even one night, so he had no choice but to start walking around. After that, the kid got lost and couldn't find his way back home. Despite how heavy the story is, Julia just smiles while recounting all of this. Julia explains it pretty frankly. Rather than using a barrier to get everyone back alive, it was better and safer to just use him as bait so the others could escape. Sherry reacts strongly to this, saying that sort of thing is just too much. She adds that they could have used a barrier in another way or something. Julia simply says that's what he thinks about it. Sherry asks if he isn't frustrated about what happened. Julia responds not really. He explains that while he was walking through that vast, dreadful twilight, he was too desperate to survive, so he just stopped thinking about them. Later, Julia sits on the bench with Sherry in the garden. Sherry tells him she thinks she understands how he ended up so strong. But Julia responds that her mindset is completely different from his, admitting that's not really how it was when it comes to his own thoughts on the matter. Leaves drift down as Julia explains he's not used to asking people for favors like this. The guy hesitates for a moment. Then Sherry bows her head with her eyes closed and asks if he would please train her. Julia reacts with surprise, but Sherry adds that she wants to be strong too. Julia agrees, saying sure, if she's okay with him. Suddenly, Sherry lights up completely, exclaiming that she's glad because she's been trying to ask him all day. Her excitement is genuine and bright. The moment freezes on her happy expression. Julia reflects that just a few minutes ago, he never thought any of this would happen. He'd been wondering about something as mundane as what he should eat for dinner. He tells Sherry she can start whenever she's ready. Sherry thanks him with this radiant smile, asking him to please take care of her. Julia is struck by how dazzling a girl's smile can be. He thinks about how he would never have imagined being able to make her smile like this. He wants to cherish it. This new like of his makes him so happy. Later that evening, Julia walks through the academy grounds looking absolutely exhausted. He notes it's gotten pretty late since he's been training with Sherry and studying for class. He lets out a tired breath. The academy buildings stand behind him as the evening settles in, lit by this strange glowing light in the distance. Julia walks along the path, his silhouette small against the backdrop. Julia suddenly tenses up, sensing something seriously wrong. He recognizes the feeling immediately. It's bloodlust. His mind races, wondering if there's actually a monster inside the city, but that doesn't make any sense. His eyes widen with realization and sweat runs down his face. It's not a normal human, but the bloodlust is definitely human. The sensation feels familiar to him somehow. He looks up and recognizes it, the twilight. Julia drops into a ready stance as a voice speaks to him from the shadows, admitting they thought about testing him with a surprise attack, but adding that it's just not their style. The bearded man stands ready with his sword raised high, declaring he'll take Julia head-on. Meanwhile below, Julia's face is tense with sweat as he watches from ground level, while the bearded man addresses him as Julia Kun with a confident smile. The bearded man faces off against Julia with his sword at the ready, maintaining his declaration to fight head-on. Meanwhile, the tension builds as Julia watches with wide eyes, preparing himself for the challenge. Julia demands to know who he is, but the bearded man just tells him with a grin that if he's still alive in a few seconds, they'll tell him. Julia's eyes widen in alarm, and before he can react, the man finishes his statement as the two fighters burst into motion. The bearded man and Julia clash at high speed, their weapons meeting in a fierce exchange. The impact sends shockwaves through the air as both fighters push against each other with intense determination. The bearded man delivers his attacks with amusement, commenting, "Look at this. You're good." Julia struggles to defend, clearly caught off guard by the man's skill. Then the bearded man announces he'll play with him a little longer, and Julia realizes the danger, recognizing this guy is serious and thinking he's dangerous. The bearded man presses forward with a powerful strike, telling him to take that, but Julia struggles to defend, recognizing he's too strong. Suddenly, the bearded man's sword flies out of his hand, spinning through the air with a crack. He reacts in shock and confusion as both fighters freeze. A female figure in white appears between them in the forest clearing. She calmly states that's enough, ending the mock battle. Claudia calls out to Gil, reminding him that he literally said in the meeting it should be a surprise attack. Gil apologizes, admitting he just wanted to test Julia head-to-head, but hey, the kid passed anyway. Meanwhile, Julia looks up at the two S-ranked exorcists, completely uncertain who these people even are. The woman introduces herself as Claudia, then the bearded man apologizes for being so abrupt, and introduces himself as Gil. Julia recognizes the name Gil as familiar, though Gil admits he's not as well known as the legendary exorcist. Then Gil reveals that both he and Claudia are S-ranked exorcists. Julia's face just freezes in shock as the information sinks in, but Gil continues, explaining they're here to take him to meet the #1 S-ranked exorcist, Cyrus. Everything is moving way too fast for Julia. Gil asks if it's too sudden. While Julia protests that this is all happening too quickly, he tells them to wait a moment. Claudia apologizes for Gil, who has a screw loose, saying she'll explain everything. But Gil just reacts with confusion. Julia's concern is obvious though, because they know exactly who he is. Then Claudia reveals they've been keeping a close eye on Julia since he arrived, and after gathering information, the S-ranked exorcists came to a decision. They even got a sneak glimpse of his sword fight against Cherryamys. Claudia asks Julia to talk to Cyrus about it. Meanwhile, Julia's mind races. Everything is happening too suddenly, which is pretty usual for him at this point. Still, he understands why they'd at least keep an eye on him given his circumstances. But then his thoughts turn to the legendary figure he's about to meet. S-ranked exorcist Cyrus, the first amongst the 12 S-ranked exorcists, the strongest human alive, the hero of Twilight. His name is well known, but only a few people have actually seen his face. Julia wonders what someone like him could possibly want from him. In the end, Julia follows them, and they arrive at a modest house. Gil and Claudia wave goodbye, telling him they'll see him later, but Julia realizes with surprise that he's going in alone. At the doorway, a woman with glasses and dark hair greets him. She calls out to Julia. Julia apologizes, saying he seems to have kept her waiting. The woman tells him not to worry and invites him to sit down while she makes tea. She's glad he came. Then Julia asks where Cyrus is. The woman responds calmly. Suddenly, Julia's eyes widen in shock as he realizes the truth and asks if she's Cyrus. She confirms she is. She understands his surprise, admitting he probably expected someone who looked a little more fierce. She introduces herself as Cyrus and greets Julia. Cyrus mentions that Julia seems to think he's really Cyrus. Apparently she gets that a lot, saying it's what the others often say. Meanwhile, Julia thinks to himself that she seems way too normal for what he expected. Then Cyrus admits she needs to look a little more fierce or something, and to be honest, it's kinda hard to believe. She casually mentions she added a lot of sugar to the tea. The two of them sit down at the table together, and Cyrus formally introduces herself again, first rank of the S-ranked exorcists, extending her hand across the table. Julia shakes it, telling her it's very nice to meet her as well. But suddenly, the handshake intensifies with this dramatic surge of power between them. Julia's face completely contorts in shock as this terrifying force emanates from the palm of Cyrus's hand, and his mind reels trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of her magic power. Cyrus stays calm behind her glasses, recognizing there's no hostility at all coming from Julia, and that's exactly why she can feel his power so strongly. At this point, there's no doubt about it anymore. Still gripping his hand, Cyrus tells Julia she believes this proves she's not lying. Julia apologizes if he scared her. Then Cyrus tells him they should get down to business. She'll get straight to the point. Julia just stands there as Cyrus makes her offer. She wants him to become an S-ranked exorcist. Julia looks uncertain as Cyrus smiles and explains she's judged that he's powerful enough to become one. Cyrus asks if he's against the idea. Then Cyrus laughs and admits it's not easy for him either. Meanwhile, Julia's mind can't keep up, spinning completely out of control since there have been way too many unexpected developments. At the table, Cyrus explains that one of the reasons she's here is to build a relationship with him as well, and as she's sure he's already aware, they can't just leave him to his own devices since he's quite the unusual one. Julia processes this, finally understanding what's really happening here. An S-ranked master exorcist is trying to recruit him. In other words, if by some chance he becomes an enemy of mankind, Cyrus wants to persuade him to join humanity before that happens. That's what this whole thing is really about. Later, Julia lies in bed at Cyrus's place, staring up at the ceiling as his thoughts drift to his childhood dream of becoming a top-ranked exorcist like his father. But now that it's actually happening, something feels off. He realizes his dreams have just been an escape from reality this whole time. Cyrus sits at the table drinking tea and asks where that part of him went. Julia admits he feels like he's been using those dreams to run away from what's real. Then Cyrus suggests it might be best for him to stay with the other S-rank exorcists. But regardless of what he chooses, Julia internally doubts he's currently capable of handling that responsibility. But then Cyrus drops a bombshell. She reveals Julia has Twilight syndrome, and most of the S-ranked exorcists are just like him, afflicted with the same condition. Research is being conducted on how to treat it, and she shows him an image of Gil and Claudia as examples. Cyrus smiles warmly as the information sinks in. Moving on, she mentions the royal family is currently visiting each city. There's something else going on beyond just the Twilight syndrome situation. Cyrus explains that the 7th barrier city is the royal family's last stop, but they need more guards to return to the 1st barrier city. They're selecting a few talented students this time to train the next generation. She asks Julia what he thinks, then tells him they're going to recommend him for the position. Julia looks uncertain about the whole thing. Meanwhile, Cyrus reflects that humanity hasn't moved forward since losing the human-demon war. Trying to maintain the status quo to give everyone relief has gradually set them back instead. She declares now is the time, that it's time for humanity to move forward. Cyrus states their ultimate goal is to regain the light of the world, and Julia's eyes widen in shock at the weight of her words. Then Julia tells her he understands and accepts, though he's still not entirely sure he's ready for this responsibility. His thoughts race as he processes everything. Maybe this is what his father was looking for all along. This is exactly what he's been lacking. The silhouette of a figure in a hat flashes through his mind. Meanwhile, Julia stands there in full white S-rank exorcist robes, his expression resolute. He declares he can handle becoming an S-rank exorcist. But Cyrus tells Julia she needs at least one strong companion from her perspective. Julia responds that for that reason he's willing to trust her. The scene shifts to a dark twilight landscape with a single light in the distance. Cyrus welcomes him, and Julia thanks her. Outside a building at the academy, Julia processes everything. He wants to become an S-rank exorcist and reassures himself that he can handle it. Later, Julia lies in bed thinking he should head back to his room, calm down, and think about it again. Then he recalls meeting with Cyrus yesterday, who offered him the chance to become an S-grade exorcist if he could pull it off. Meanwhile, someone calls out to a person named Yuri, and another voice comments that becoming an S-rank exorcist is a seriously responsible thing to do. A girl with long light hair approaches Julia sitting on a bench and hands him a book, saying she was asked to give it to him. Julia thanks her, thinking to himself that in the meantime he should focus on something else. Looking through the book, Julia notes he's 2 years behind in his studies but would really like to continue them. The girl confirms that everything she wrote down in this book and offers to show him her notes. Julia explains he wants to bring his knowledge of Twilight to the table, since that increases the likelihood of survival. The girl asks what he thinks about special training. Julia responds that if there's time, he's definitely interested, and clarifies it's combat training, not just for fun. In the background, someone asks a person named Sherry if they have a date after school tonight. There's this awkward confirmation. Then a male voice asks if someone isn't strong enough already, but a female responds she wouldn't mind combining business with pleasure and directs the question to Kit. The girl asks Safia and Kit if they'll get a rank soon. Safia enthusiastically confirms she's already been appointed, while Kit mentions he should have his ID soon. Meanwhile, the conversation shifts to the royal security assignment. The girl clarifies it's not just a rumor, but actually true. A few students from the school have been selected to provide royal security. A male confidently states he's sure they'll pick him, and a female agrees, saying it's lucky to be in another barrier town. Julia looks at the building and reminds himself this isn't just an excursion, it's supposed to be fun too. Then the training begins. The girl and Julia engage in combat across the academy grounds. She instructs him to watch his breathing and only put power into the punch being attacked. Julia struggles to keep up with her intense strikes. The training session keeps going strong across the academy grounds. Sherry delivers this insane high kick that sends Julia stumbling backward. She's checking out his progress, pointing out that his lunges still need some work, but she's got to admit he's already bulked up and figured out how to control his momentum. Julia throws her a compliment, telling her she's cool. But then Sherry hits him with this observation. The more they work together, the more she's realizing something about him. She tells him that if anyone's cool, it's actually him since he thinks differently and has these amazing abilities. Then she calls him Yuri. Meanwhile, the training's wrapping up as someone mentions they should probably head back since it looks like rain's rolling in. Julia's watching Sherry, noticing she's definitely getting stronger. He understands that being aware of an opponent's strength basically becomes part of someone's own power. He acknowledges that Sherry's learning that power too. She thanks him. Then out of nowhere, she drops this question, can she use his bathroom today? She calls him Yuri again. Julia's completely shocked. Sherry quickly explains that the bathroom in the women's dorm is being repaired and they promise to fix it by tomorrow, so everyone's gotta survive today. She adds that she's so sweaty right now it's disgusting. Sherry makes it crystal clear she's just going to take a bath and warns Julia not to get any weird ideas. Julia says he gets it. Sherry fires back that she's not imagining anything. Julia reassures her that it's no big deal. The rain starts coming down, and someone suggests they head back before it gets any stronger. As they're heading inside, Julia mentions that she can totally use the bathroom of course, but there's one thing he needs to tell her. Inside the bathroom, Julia is explaining to Sherry that the room wasn't originally equipped with a bathtub, and must have been added later. As they can both see, there are no walls, but there's at least a curtain. They're just standing there in this painfully awkward silence, both clearly uncomfortable as hell with the situation. Julia glances at the window and notices it's already pouring outside. He suggests he'll just go wait outside. But Sherry tells Julia not to worry since she already told him it's no big deal, and he should just stare at the wall for a while. Julia reluctantly agrees. Then it hits him. The absolute absurdity of the situation he's somehow ended up in. Julia sits there facing the wall, trying to keep himself together. He's acutely aware that right now, right behind him, his classmate is totally naked and taking a bath. He tells himself to stop thinking about it, that he needs a distraction right now. Then he hears a sound and panics, wondering what it was. He frantically tells himself not to think about it, tries to focus his mind on something else entirely, mentally running through thoughts about S-ranked exorcists, Silas, Gil, and Claudia, the royal guards, anything to keep his mind occupied. But then Sherry calls out to Julia from behind the curtain. Julia freaks out, wondering what she wants and thinking she must be a mind reader or something. Sherry asks him what he thinks about those rumors regarding the royal guards. Julia stammers that he thinks they might choose her. Sherry says she wants to go there too, then mentions that everyone's been watching her since she got into the academy because her mom is the director. Sherry continues, saying it's more like stalking at this point. Some people watch her out of anticipation, some out of jealousy, but she was just a talentless kid herself. Still, that doesn't mean she's going to lose. She's aiming to get a rank first among all her classmates, wants to get stronger, and she's not going to lose to herself or anyone else. Julia calls out her name. After a pause, he tells her he was promoted to S rank. Sherry thinks that's cool, then says he probably wants to hear what she thinks, so she'll tell him. Then she reacts with shock, asking what he just said. Sherry congratulates him, saying it's so damn cool there's no other word for it. Julia thanks her but admits he's still at a loss. 2 years ago, he was just a kid who only dreamed of being an exorcist, but after surviving the Twilight years and coming back to get appointed right away, he can't believe it's real. Everything happened too fast, and besides, he really doesn't want to stand out. Then Julia tells Sherry to look at his hand. He shows her the strange markings and explains it's stage 5 Twilight syndrome, and he's been like this for 2 years. He got his powers from being in the Twilight Zone. Most S-grade exorcists are immune to Twilight poison, but normal people aren't. He admits he's probably not such a person anymore. Julia continues, saying that with this power and becoming an S-rank exorcist, he may be betrayed or abandoned again. He's still dealing with all of this. Suddenly, he hears something and wonders if that was the curtain moving. Then he hears footsteps. Sherry bursts through the curtain, yelling at Julia not to say such nonsense. She's furious with him for talking like that. Sherry grabs Julia and pulls him close, telling him not to be afraid of his power. She already told him he's strong. It's not just about his abilities, but his will to survive. That strength is worthy of respect. Julia responds affirmatively. Sherry takes Julia's hands in hers and tells him that human beings are intelligent beings after all. He might not have the courage to face pain, but he's without a doubt a good person. He's very kind to people, and that's why he shouldn't be afraid of them. There's a moment of silence before Sherry thanks him with tears in her eyes. Julia responds, saying he's very happy, and thanks Sherry in return, telling her he wanted to hear those words. He's glad to be back, to have someone actually say those words to him. Sherry tells Julia he doesn't have to say such strange things anymore. She can feel it. He will be the light that can cut through this darkness. Then Sherry laughs awkwardly and says this is getting awkward. Julia just looks at her as Sherry trails off, saying, well then yeah. Suddenly she realizes the situation they're in. Julia tells her okay, so turn around. He still hasn't taken a bath. Julia and Sherry stand close together, their hands reaching toward each other as Julia tells her he's ready. A brilliant light bursts over the cityscape, as Julia declares he'll be the light that cuts through the twilight. The light continues to shine as Julia repeats his vow. Later at the academy, Julia walks across the grounds in his uniform, confidently telling someone not to doubt it. Then Sherry greets him cheerfully in the morning, and Julia returns the greeting, though he seems pretty flustered. He thinks to himself that no matter what it costs him, he just can't separate the image of Sherry from before and now. A student greets Shelley and Julia good morning. The light-haired girl apologizes about yesterday, saying it's just that things happened. Julia tries to take responsibility, saying he should be the one apologizing. But Sophia, a dark-haired girl, stares at them for a moment before asking what the two of them did last night. After greeting Sophia good morning, someone asks the light-haired girl to tell her about her first time later. The light-haired girl protests that nothing happened, and she's not stupid, while Julia frantically insists he didn't do anything. Someone reacts in shock, asking what that's all about. Sophia explains they were together all the time. After an apology, there's suddenly an action scene where someone gets flung through the air. Then Kit appears, pointing and explaining he has morning practice. When asked what he's doing so early in the morning, he says it's for the Royal Squirt selection. Someone tells him that's a long way off, and he confirms it's just practice. Julia says he wants to train as hard as he can. Kit responds that he wants to get into A rank, which is why he decided to start now. He assures them he won't be late for class. One of the girls agrees with him. Someone offers to help, and Julia wonders what Silas meant by that. The two girls wish Kit good luck. Meanwhile, students gather around a bulletin board looking at new postings. The announcement reveals that the ranks of the Royal Scout are being joined by Sherry, and her partner will be determined by a duel. Someone exclaims in surprise that it's a duel between Yuri and Kit. Julia asks his sensei what this means. The instructor tells him he already knows what it means and offers to go over it and explain anyway. An instructor explains that the current requirement for Scout is 1 boy and 1 girl. She notes that picking a girl was easy since Sherry is now at the top, but picking a boy proved way more difficult. Meanwhile, at the meeting, the factions and the king's representative were completely divided, one side in favor of Yuri and the other backing Kit. In the hallway, Julia walks with 2 female students on either side of him. The instructor continues explaining that they wondered how to choose the most suitable candidate out of the 2, and eventually they decided to rely on the result of a duel. She reminds them there are no conditions to fighting style, but they shouldn't forget that it's not a real fight. Later on, Julia and Sherry stand near a window. Suddenly, Cyrus appears out of nowhere, explaining that's why he wanted to apologize to Yuri. Julia seems completely caught off guard by the unexpected visit. Julia greets Silas, and Sherry reacts with total shock, confirming that Silas is the one they were just talking about. Silas returns the greeting casually. Then the situation gets explained through this comedic illustration showing how the polarized opinions collided. Being a member of the royal family and a member of the faction, they each had different points of view. Just like Principal Amos said earlier, opinions are divided. Silas mentions he needs to talk to the other member as well. Then Silas tells Julia they'll do it tonight, but Julia refuses at first. Silas explains the representatives of the monarchy will be leaving sooner than planned, so the duel has to happen today. He offers to try to postpone it if Julia isn't ready, but Julia firmly says no. Their hands move toward each other as Silas tells Julia he's counting on him. Silas instructs him to come to the practice field after class, and Julia agrees. Silas tells them that'll be all. Julia stands with his back to the viewer while Silas and Sherry remain visible. Sherry tells Julia she hopes he understands the effort involved. Meanwhile, another girl looks on with a determined expression. After Silas leaves, Julia reflects that Kit probably realizes it too. He admits that if he hadn't shown up today out of the blue, Kit would have been chosen. Then Sherry softly calls out to him. Julia declares he wants to show Kit what he's worth. He still feels bad for the guy, but at the same time, he's got his eyes set on getting S-ranked. Because of that, there's no room for doubts about what needs to be done. Meanwhile, Sherry looks at him with a warm smile. At the practice field, Kit and Julia face each other with the academy building visible in the background. Silas steps up and explains the conditions of the duel. The weapon of choice is wooden sword, but magic is totally allowed. The condition is simple. One of them wins. Kit takes a breath, clearly finding the situation unexpected. Then Julia tells Kit he'll do his best, and Kit responds that he's ready too. Julia acknowledges him. Someone observes from the sidelines as Kit charges forward with his wooden sword, yelling as he attacks. Silas calls for them to start. Both fighters rush at each other with their wooden swords. Magical energy erupts between them as they clash. Julia watches Kit's movements carefully. Suddenly, Kit activates his earth magic, creating a ground barrier. Julia recognizes the technique and realizes Kit is using a ground barrier to enhance his defense. The two combatants collide with tremendous force, their swords meeting in a powerful clash. Meanwhile, Julia and Kit face each other through a massive earth wall Kit has erected between them, Julia noting that the petrification has made Kit's blows way stronger. He realizes Kit's attacking by hiding behind the wall, and suddenly Julia understands the strategy now. Julia charges forward with his sword, stating he can see Kit even if he's hiding. The earth wall begins to crack and crumble under Julia's assault, breaking apart with dramatic force. Julia breaks through Kit's defenses, knocking him back with a powerful strike, the impact sending Kit flying while Julia presses his advantage. But Kit recovers his stance, standing among the rocky terrain his magic created. He declares he won't let Julia win easily, then explains that his earth fortress isn't only his shield, but also his weapon, emphasizing that it's not just a wall. Kit launches his counterattack, using his earth magic aggressively and declaring it'll crush Julia. Meanwhile, Julia stays low and focused, acknowledging that Kit's technique is pretty cool and noting it's a precision shot. But despite the incoming attack, Julia affirms he's not going to lose. Then Julia deflects Kit's earth projectiles with his wooden sword, blocking the attack with precise movements as multiple rock fragments fly through the air and his blade cuts through them. Julia maintains his focus and determination while debris scatters around him from the deflected attack. Suddenly, Julia breaks through Kit's earth defenses with a powerful upward strike, the impact shattering the remaining rock barriers and sending debris flying everywhere. Kit gets forced backward by the sheer force of Julia's attack. From the sidelines, Sherry watches alongside Kit, analyzing Julia's abilities. She observes that he controls so much energy and turns it into a weapon, but there has to be a limit to it. She figures the strategy is to wait for the right moment and hit where he's vulnerable. Kit processes this whole thing, thinking through the situation, realizing Julia's actually pretty tough and that he needs to start counterattacking if he wants any chance here. But then Kit admits defeat. Julia stands there victorious, breathing heavily from how intense the match was, while Sherry observes everything from the side by the academy building. Meanwhile, someone asks if the sword is Julia's ability. Julia confirms he's used it to deal with Twilight before. Another person notes it's effective against Twilight, but questions what would happen if a demon came along. Someone else chimes in, adding that it's good for regular magic too. Then another voice just dismisses the whole thing as pathetic and suggests keeping things simple. Kit tells Julia to go and show everyone what he can do. Julia thanks him enthusiastically. Kit responds that he'll win next time and says he'll see Julia later, and Julia just maintains his calm composure as Kit walks away from the training grounds. Sherry comments that Julia and Kit are getting along well. Julia thanks her. She tells him she's counting on him to be the royal escort. Then Sherry asks if Julia is from the third barrier city, mentioning that she'll be in the other barrier cities while he handles his assignment. She tells him they'll give him a detailed schedule later and says she'll see him soon. Julia thinks about third barrier city, his old home. As he reflects on his situation, Julia considers that thinking about home might be natural, but he's changed since then. He started a new life in a new place and made friends, so it's time to take care of the present, which is the main thing at the moment. Julia looks determined. In the meantime, he has to prove himself in the escort mission. Standing outside the fortress in his white escort cloak, Julia watches as the royal family prepares to leave after their inspection. He's been given the escort duty and reflects on how quickly this day arrived. A massive armored vehicle sits before them, an impressive piece of magical engineering. Julia stares at the Mago machine with wonder as someone explains that the thing is powered with magic. It's actually a large dummy with a magic barrier maintained by a high-ranking mage, and while the crossing in the mountains is dangerous, thanks to this machine, it can be overcome. The next morning rolls around, and a female student greets Julia with a good morning. Julia greets her back. It's Sherry. Meanwhile, Silas, Sophia, and Kit are all standing there too. Julia is caught off guard seeing Sophia and Kit present. Silas jumps in to explain that these two have been chosen as escorts as well. Apparently yesterday the officials decided they needed more people to work faster, so Silas got called in to escort them. Kit confirms he was called in too. Someone mentions bringing a bento so they can all eat together, and Julia gets pretty excited about the whole arrangement. Inside the Mago machine, a female attendant with glasses and dark hair announces they're leaving soon and asks everyone to please take their seats. Julia takes his position. The attendant starts guiding the royal party, telling them to come this way and asking others to make way. The group includes Princess Lian in her elaborate dress and tiara, along with other members of the escort team. Julia tells Princess Lian to take care of herself. Princess Lian thanks him warmly, smiling at the exchange. But then the scene shifts. Turns out this actually happened last night before the departure. This is Julia's first time getting introduced to Princess Lian before the escort mission, and he's completely taken aback by how beautiful she is. The dark-haired woman with glasses, who seems to be coordinating everything, tells him that before their trip she'd like him to meet Princess Lian. The princess apologizes for calling him so quickly, then asks him to just call her Lian and mentions she's heard a lot about him. Julia realizes with total shock that she's the Princess Lian, the actual one. The woman explains that the purpose of this mission is to escort high-ranking guests, specifically the princess herself. Princess Lian immediately starts bombarding Julia with questions, asking if she can call him Yuri-chan, what his favorite food is, whether he has a girlfriend, what it was like fighting demons and dragons, and if he really lived alone in the twilight for 2 years. The rapid-fire questions leave Julia a bit overwhelmed. Meanwhile, the dark-haired woman with glasses laughs and apologizes for the princess's enthusiasm. Julia nervously says it's okay. Then, the woman with glasses brings up something more serious. She mentions something called Twilight Syndrome and explains that the reason she introduced Julia to the princess is because of this condition. A close-up shows Princess Leon's eye as the woman reveals that the princess can sense the destructive power of Twilight within Julia. The woman asks Julia if he minds having the princess check him. Julia agrees without hesitation, saying of course he doesn't mind. She tells him she needs to make sure. Julia awkwardly asks if he should take his clothes off, but the princess tells him he can do it as he is. Princess Leon stands before him in her elaborate royal dress, power radiating from her as she prepares to examine the twilight energy within Julia's body. Princess Leon focuses her senses on Julia and comments on how amazing it is that he can maintain the power of twilight in his body. She notes that until this moment, she thought Cyrus had the strongest concentration of twilight energy, but Julia actually surpasses it. She adds that usually people can't withstand that kind of power at all. Princess Leon continues her assessment, saying she thinks that both Julia and Cyrus have a strong affinity with the evil of Twilight, and Julia processes this information quietly. The princess's words hang in the air as the deeper implications of what she's sensing in him start to sink in. Then Julia himself acknowledges that it's not just the Twilight problem, but a mystery that's yet to be solved. The dark-haired woman with glasses confirms what Julia said, agreeing that it's a mystery that has yet to be solved. Julia looks contemplative as he absorbs everything they've discussed about his connection to the Twilight. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to show the massive Mago machine vehicle traveling through the dangerous mountain pass, beginning their escort mission with Princess Leon aboard. Julia stands on the deck of the massive vehicle as it travels through the mountain pass, thinking about what Princess Leon told him. He wonders if he feels any different now, whether before or after learning the truth. He questions what it even means to be close to the evil one. Before all this, he could only think about where he might find that knowledge, but now he actually knows about it. Julia is on patrol duty when someone calls out to him, asking if he's being a workaholic. Sophia appears, and Julia asks if something happened. She tells him to listen for a moment, then explains that in case of emergency, he should know what to do. Sophia brings up Julia's father, mentioning that she heard about him from a rumor, though everyone knows the story anyway. Julia confirms he got his information from his father, though he admits the guy's not home very often. Sophia asks if he remembers A. Gilson and Ego guys with the big sword. Then she gets to her point, asking if when Julia becomes S-rank, he'll be fighting more demons. Julia agrees, though somewhat hesitantly. Sophia asks Julia directly if he's looking forward to it. Julia nervously confirms that he is. Sophia smiles, seeming genuinely interested in his answer. But then suddenly, both of them notice something in the distance and their expressions shift to alarm. Spider-like demons with ink-black bodies swarm toward the vehicle across the rocky terrain. Julia immediately calls out a report from the observation deck, yelling that there are monsters at 12 o'clock. They're under attack. He orders Sophia to get downstairs, and she responds, moving to follow his command. The ink spiders close in on the vehicle, their grotesque forms crawling over the mountainside. Julia calls out to Cyrus. The woman with glasses identifies the creatures as ink spiders and notes that one is pretty problematic at B rank. Julia observes that they look hostile and need to be taken out. He points out that ink spiders are a strange kind that normally lives far to the east, questioning what they're doing here. The woman with glasses spots the leader of the ink spider pack looming over there on the rocky terrain. The massive creature stands menacingly among the rest of the swarm. Someone tells Yuri to take the leader on, and Julia confirms he will, saying he'll take care of the rest. Sophie reacts with shock, questioning if he means all of them by himself. The woman with glasses just smiles confidently while Sophie looks stressed, but he steels himself and confirms he understands. Then the woman with glasses lays out the plan. The rest of them will stay behind to protect the barrier while the mag machine has to go through the spiders. She tells Julia the spiders are on him anyway, and Julia tells her they should go. Julia orders them to start taking out the closest ones and rushes forward first, moving with incredible speed across the rocky terrain. The woman with glasses follows right behind him, and one of the ink spiders reacts with surprise as Julia closes in. Both Julia and the woman strike down the creatures in rapid succession, cutting through the demons with precision. Julia leaps through the air, surrounded by debris from the defeated spiders. Meanwhile, the woman with glasses reminds him of the plan. Julia should take on the others while she handles the ringleader. The path forward is clear now, and Julia confirms he understands before pushing ahead. Julia tears through the ink spiders on the ground while the woman with glasses attacks the massive leader from above, both of them striking simultaneously and cutting down the creatures with precision and speed. Julia tells her he immobilized the leader by removing its limbs, and the woman says they should move on to the torso now. But then something moves. Julia's eyes widen in shock as the spider's severed limbs start regenerating right before his eyes. Julia realizes the spiders must be mutating, explaining he's seen quite a few of these creatures in the past 2 years, but this is the first time he's witnessed regeneration like this. The woman asks if they should hit them in the head then, and the mutated spider towers over them with its grotesque body covered in glowing eyes. Julia strikes at the spider, but it doesn't work. The creature regenerates right away. He watches in frustration as the wounds close up immediately, trying to figure out what's causing this. Then someone notices the spider has some kind of core and says they need to take another look. Julia realizes it must be the heart, so he readies his blade and charges forward at the spider's massive body. Julia swings his blade through the air and pierces directly through the spider's core. The strike lands true, hitting the creature's heart with a burst of light and impact.